think what frustrated me was none of these things really did what I wanted, and I didn't really want to wait for, something else to come along. And it was really born out of personal frustration. I think startups often, if you're making something valuable, and making something that people want, I think there's a lot of ways that it can succeed, even if there are other folks doing similar things.
Awesome, that's great. So that's a great lesson for everyone. Just because there are giant incumbents in the market space, that should not stop you from pursuing your dreams if you have a great idea, right?
Yeah, startups, people overestimate a little bit how often startups are killed by competitors. Startups usually die from self-inflicted wounds and making things that people don't want. And actually, Y Combinator, which was one of our first investors, their motto is make something people want. And if you do that, then there's a lot of different ways you can succeed.
So going by this first investment, so when you started out, when most startups have to make a lot of tough decisions, especially in the early years. So teleport us back to your boardroom, meeting rooms, game rooms, wherever you're making your decisions, right? Tell us about some of the tough decisions you had to make and the impact they have had on your company.
Sure. So I don't know if obviously, I think that the biggest challenge is, I started, when I was 24, in my bedroom in my apartment in Inman Square in Cambridge, Mass. And I was about a year out of undergrad. And I think the hard thing is really it's not so much any one decision as much as having to make hundreds of little decisions. And, I think a lot of people in the room have had the same experience where, you're starting this for the first time, you have no idea what you're doing, and you're making all these decisions about, who am I going to hire, what office space are we going to get, what should the product do, how much should it cost, and then there's just the mundane things, we moved out from Boston to California, and within a couple weeks, ended up getting connected through Y Combinator to Sequoia Capital, who are our first seed investors. And we go through that whole financing process, and we reach the end of it, and they decided to invest in our company. And we're like, this is great, because this is what you dream of. You move, you have like $1,000 left in your bank account, and suddenly someone's going to write you a check for $1 million to get started. And they're like, this is awesome, we'd love to invest, please send us the wiring instructions. And we're like, oh my God. The only thing I know about a wire transfer I saw in a James Bond movie. And so we're like, yeah, great, we'll do that. And the only thing we have is our first, we sort of had my first business checking account from Bank of America that we'd set up, back in Boston. And if there's one thing you don't want to screw up when you take venture investment, it's figuring out how to get the money into your bank account. So we're like, okay, we should really figure this out. And we had just, literally our boxes weren't even unpacked since moving to San Francisco. This was in fall of 2007. And my co-founder and I were like, well, we should probably head to Bank of America and see what we should do about this. And so we walk into the branch in North Beach, and there's the tellers on one side, and there's the leather seat people on the other side. And we're like, this is probably a leather seat problem. So we go over there and we sit down, and the lady's nice. She's like, okay, well, how can I help you? And my co-founder and I are a little disheveled, wearing hoodies and flip-flops, and so I sit down and I'm like, okay. So our bank account had $60 in it at the time, and I was like, so is there a limit to how much a bank account can hold? And she's like, no, why? I'm like, can it hold $1 million? And she kind of looks at me and she's like, yes. And I don't know if she thought it was drugs or something else, but I stopped asking questions, she stopped asking questions, we figured it out. But it's hundreds of little things like that, where you're just doing it for the first time, and just new things are coming at you. And to this day, we have you have the same kind of challenge, where it's just, and that's what I love about it, is that there's never a dull moment.
So your first big challenge was to find out whether your bank account can hold enough money. That's great.
Good problem to have.
Great. So, a lot of startups these days are doing what's now come to known as a pivot, right? And it looks like it's almost become a prerequisite to become successful. So have you had your moment of pivot yet, or any surprising discoveries that you have made along the way? And what was your original vision? What is Dropbox and how it has evolved since you conceived it?
We're actually a pretty unusual situation in that the sort of problem that was one of the benefits of sort of having the problem yourself. So Dropbox was born out of my frustration because it even goes back to MIT, where I studied computer science, and you sit down at any of tens of thousands of computers and your stuff is just in front of you and it's just taken care of. And then you graduate and it's back to the Stone Age, right? I'm emailing myself stuff, I'm carrying on a thumb drive, just all the things we do that we don't even notice to kind of scrape by. And I was working on another company at the time that I had started, and I had to work across a bunch of different computers. And I was just so frustrated. The sort of non-PR version of the story is, I'm an engineer. I had a 3 gigabyte VM image I needed to work across different computers, and moving that, being able to access a file that big from all these different computers. There were all these tools that were supposed to do this, but none of them really worked, and I could never really trust any of them because half the time, you couldn't tell what they're doing, or it didn't really solve the problem. And so it started out as a tool I was just building for myself. And so it was pretty clear to me sort of what the problem was, and sort of some of the simplicity of Dropbox. I mean, now that's like something specific as a virtue we have in our design process, but it's actually kind of by accident in that we sort of were making the simplest thing that could possibly work because we didn't have time to build something complicated. But it's interesting, a lot of startups do pivot. You hear about PayPal starting out in like beaming payments from PDA to PDA and then moving into web payments sort of by accident, or other pretty notable examples. But it's been surprising. The problem we set out to solve the product we built and the sort of business we were going after is actually pretty similar to what we hoped would exist, and we never had to make really huge changes, except for, there are some hard questions like, okay, to what extent do we go after individuals versus businesses, a number of market questions like that. And I think that sort of, you're starting out, you're just like, okay, I just need to make something that works. And you're just building a prototype or just scraping something together. And then as you get an audience, then sort of the vision for what you want to do expands, and as you have real people using the product, and it's reaching people from all these different walks of life, and you have this audience and this platform, there's just so much more you can do.